Hi everyone, welcome to our lesson on poetry analysis. This week we'll be learning to use the acronym Tps-Fastt to analyze poetry from the Harlem Renaissance era. Before we get started, I want to talk to you about your responsibilities as a student when you approach new literature. Of course, as a student, you have many responsibilities like paying attention, taking notes, etc., but there are two specific things you need to do when you approach a new piece of literature. First, you need to give it the time it needs. With poetry, that means you'll need to read a poem several times to analyze it. But all literature needs to be given time. You shouldn't try to read a novel in a day or a short story in a few minutes. The second thing you need to do is use a dictionary. No one knows every word in the English language because it's constantly changing. So if a word is unfamiliar to you, or you know the word but the context doesn't seem to make sense, take the time to go to dictionary.com and read the definition. Most words have more than one meaning, and not taking the time to make sure you understand a word's meaning within the poem can change your whole understanding of the poem. Okay, let's get started. The first letter of the acronym for this week is T. There are 3 T's in Tps-Fastt, but the first one stands for title. This seems pretty straightforward, but it's important that you remember to complete this analysis step before you read any of the actual poem. So what you're going to do in this step is look at the words in the title and think about what they mean to you. What did they make you think of? Are there any emotions connected with the words? Are the words controversial? For example, let's say you have a poem titled Fish. Maybe the word fish reminds you of your dad and how he likes to go fishing. Some words are significant to society, like the word abortion. There are a lot of emotions and opinions about that word. When you fill in your acronym worksheet, you want to write down as many meanings and associations as you can for the words in the title. Okay, let's move on. Our next letter is P. P stands for paraphrase. Paraphrasing is putting things into your own words. In this case, you're paraphrasing the literal action in the poem. If the words describe a dog running through a field or the sun crossing the sky, that is the literal action. Once you've done that, then you need to decide if what is happening is actually representing something else. For example, if the literal action is describing the sun crossing the sky, but the poem's also talking about people's lives, then the sun might actually be representing the passage of time. If you're having difficulty with this part of the analysis, you're welcome to skip it and come back after you've completed the step dealing with figurative language. Just make sure you come back to it before you complete the acronym's last 2 T's. The next letter in our acronym is S. S stands for speaker. A lot of people might think that the speaker is the same as a poet, but that's not what we mean when we say speaker. A better way to think about it is to think of the speaker as the voice you hear when you read the poem. What kind of person is it? Is the voice young or old? Male or female? Is the person a parent or a worker or an old man? You can usually tell this by the words that are used. For example, children use different words than adults do. So look for things like word choices when you're trying to identify the speaker. For this part of the analysis, write down as many characteristics of the person who is speaking as you can identify. Our next letter is F. F actually includes both figurative language and imagery. When you get to this letter, you're looking for any figurative language the author is using, like similes or metaphors. You really want to pay attention to this part of the analysis. If you don't recognize some figurative language, you might be taking something that's figurative literally, and this can confuse the ideas that make up the theme of the poem. You want to also note any imagery. Remember that imagery is not just words that describes things that you can see, but descriptions of things through all the 5 senses, including touch, smell, hearing, and taste. Imagery is part of the poet's message. You need to tie the imagery to the other parts of the poem to help you understand the message. A is for attitude, but when we talk about attitude in literature, we actually mean tone. At this point, you should be able to identify the subject of the poem. Once you have that, then you can think about the word choices, figurative language, and imagery and decide what kind of attitude the speaker has about the subject. If you have a hard time coming up with words to describe the attitude that you hear, you can find a link to a list of tone words on the course homepage. Our next letter is S. S stands for shift. When we shift in a car, we switch gears. We go slower or faster. You can even hear the sound of the car change at different speeds. When we're looking for shifts in a poem, we are looking for change. Change in feeling, attitude, word choices, even punctuation. Shifts are sometimes abrupt, but they can also be subtle. Sometimes there can be more than one. Let's look at the poem Ballad of Birmingham by Dudley Randall. This poem was written in response to a church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama during the Civil Rights Movement. The first four stanzas consist of a conversation between a mother and her child. The child wants to go downtown and participate in a freedom march, but the mother says no and talks about all the dangers of marches, like clubs and hoses and guns. She tells her daughter that instead she wants her to go to church and sing in the children's choir. The poem shifts in the next stanza. Instead of continuing the conversation, there is a description of the mother getting her daughter ready for church, combing her hair and putting on her white gloves. It's a sweet image of a caring mother and her child. This image continues into the next stanza, then abruptly changes, and in this case, the change is actually indicated with the word but. At that point, the feel of the poem changes, as we hear that it's the last smile the mother will have. The next two stanzas seem like they speed up, and the words in them like explosion, wet and wild, raced. These all give the feeling of urgency and fear as the mother races to the church and is digging through the rubble. The last two lines are the point where the mother is realizing what she has lost. The next letter is T, and it stands for title. And no, this isn't a mistake. At this point, you have so much more knowledge about the poem that when you read the title again, it should take on new meaning. This is where you want to write down how it is tied to the rest of the poem, but it's also a time to think about what your initial reaction to the title was. Sometimes the author actually wants you to see more than one meaning in the title. Our last letter is T, and this time it stands for theme. But before you start this letter, go back over the other letters and make sure you can't add more. For example, you might want to go back to the letter P where you did the paraphrasing. It's possible that after you looked at figurative language and imagery, your perspective on the poem might have changed. Once you have reviewed what you know, think carefully about the poem as a whole. What do you think the author is trying to say? When you write what you think the theme is, make sure you include both the subject of the poem and what the poet is saying about it.